Hi, I'm Chris Atala from Games Done Legit. It's July 4th, 2024, and I just had a couple thoughts I wanted to share with the world about Independence Day and Japanese video games. Um, so I never stopped to think about how kind of strange it was that an enemy my grandpa and like our entire country fought decades prior was providing my greatest source of entertainment as a kid. Um, it's kind of like if 20 years from now, if the Taliban started making a series of like efficient household appliances or something that like took the Western world by storm. That was like Nintendo in the 80s, and I promise this'll all make sense by the time I get to the end of it. So my grandpa was an ace in World War II, and he fought in like the European theater. But Japan was just as more so hated by Americans for the date that you live in infamy and the Pearl Harbor and everything else, etc. So all this I was learning about his history as a kid, and really through like a lot of computer games too. There were even like World War II, you know, games back then, in the in the mid '80s. Um, my grandpa lived that, as a young man, barely 20 years old, and risking his life every mission to win, what was one of the few unavoidable, justifiable wars in human history. So he got me into the family Atari and then a real computer because he was an IBM lifer after the war. In 1987, then I saw Super Mario 1 for the first time. Like Mario, like running through like the whole level, smoothly scrolling, the detailed world and the creatures, the warp pipes, and like the music. And I always imagined it was like the first time people saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it was kind of like the Commodore 64, like overnight, was as cool as cutting edge as like Pat Boone whitewashing Little Richard, So Nintendo was the hottest toy, in the country, and the latest in a parade of quality, inexpensive Japanese products invading the U.S. and kind of out innovating and outselling American stuff that we thought we were the best at, like vehicles and music players and now video games. So Japan is an incredibly proud nation, and like every nation, it balances its national pride with reflecting on its own gravest mistakes. I'd say mainly its actions in the first half of the 20th century, and after World War One, the European winners of the war had punished the losers, for the global quagmire and devastation that they were all left to clean up. And you kind of think, if anything, the crimes against humanity before and after World War II could have justified an even greater, reparations against, the Axis powers. And as this was what I read last week, and this is kind of what sparked this connection that I made between video games and what I'm talking about today. As the most powerful men in America debated which tens of thousands of non-combatants would be annihilated to shock the Japanese into unconditional surrender, many officers and scientists really wanted to go for the jugular, um, something to not only display the unimaginable destructive power of the bomb, but maim Japan's spirit, irrevocably. And the U.S. Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, disagreed with one potential target on the list of Japanese cities and repeatedly took it off the list. And they all kept like putting it back on there, like kind of like a shoving match between like siblings in a car back seat. But obviously, which with the much higher stakes. And Simpson personally appealed to President Truman to spare Japan's oldest center of learning and history, which was Kyoto, um, to leave its Japan's culture and maybe their soul intact after the war. And we all know that revenge doesn't help make things better, but we naturally crave it after we've been wronged. And I could try to imagine the personal and political pressure that the Allied leaders must have been feeling to make them pay for Pearl Harbor alone. You know, um, Let alone some of the stories of the differences that American POWs were treated versus if you were captured in in the same situation in Europe. Read up on it. It's pretty it's pretty crazy. And like in Street Fighter, like I want revenge after losing a match in a in a fighting game. So and that emotion is even that is like very powerful for me. And I can't imagine the revenge I would want if I lost a family member, through combat in the Pacific, or you know, um, like in a Japanese POW camp. But the Allies made post World War II treaty choices that we're still suffering the consequences of today. But before the war was even over, they consciously strived to learn from the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 at the end of World War I and just do better. And America helped rebuild and support Japan after the war. And just a few decades later, not only were we finding out that these guys could make awesome stuff that we wanted to consume, but they loved Western culture. And I think too, like, and a lot of this is from playing Hideo Kojima games, and him growing up in post World War II Japan, and the effects of the bomb being dropped in that country. Think about how Japan must have felt after the war. I mean, we dropped the biggest explosions in human history on 150,000 non-military human beings there, and it's pretty easy for a losing country to transform its collective shame into anger and indignance. And that can lead to blind nationalism and even fascism, which is what happened with sparking World War II. And like some Americans are still not over the South's lost cause, because Reconstruction after Lincoln was assassinated went so poorly. And we're still grappling with that, honestly, as a nation 150 years plus later. So 30, 40 years after the bomb dropped, they're rearranging our language into like innocuous gibberish on like phrases like "circuit beaver" on their T-shirts, which I learned from Dave Barry Just Japan. Excellent book. And I heard my grandparents use racist language, many times as a kid. And if there was one group I would have expected that to be directed toward, though I would never excuse that, I would think it would be the Japanese. But I never heard them say one negative or mocking word about, the origin of this entertainment that I was now obsessing with, starting in '87 through, the rest of the 14 years that my grandpa was alive. And I'm no expert on 20th century cultural attitudes and all that, but this post-war love affair between the United States and Japan seems an incredibly unlikely one after what we had just put each other through, um, you know, in the mid 20th century. But I think we both nations vowed to do better and not replicate some of the mistakes of you know um, the global past, but also our nation's past as well. And then like look at all the great things that came about that from mutually and separately for us in Japan. Um, Today, so much of my life has come to me through video games. Happiness, accomplishments, so many friends, cultural experiences, traveling the world. Um, through the tournament back there, seasons meetings I used to run, and all that. And now my job, in a company that I created. And specifically, it all traces back to Nintendo. Like, yeah, there was Atari and like the arcade days of the 70s and 80s, but video games were regarded as a fad, and the Western video game industry, crashed in '83, I believe, and it was just, gaming was just left for dead, with a capital D, and Nintendo treated video games, as artistic creations full of like beauty and music and life and even love. And when everyone else was just regarding them as bleeps and bloops, of Centipede, Defender, those great games. But Nintendo, after this crash in the West, they single-handedly revived video games globally and created, not just the modern gaming industry, but birthed a new aspect of human culture and expression. That defines that is video games now. And do you know where Nintendo was founded? Back in 1889, and they're still headquartered today. It's Kyoto. So it's like one American's restraint and vision, overruled, revenge and victory, and we offer Japan a helping hand rather than a clenched fist. And as Americans, we do have the Toby Keith, put a boot in their ass, side to us too. But that's not all there is to America. And I think like our greatest moments of achievement and national pride are often collaborative. And like even we celebrate Independence Day today. Us breaking away from Britain, and if you look at the strained relationship between Britain and many, of its past colonies, you know, like yeah, we were the first colony, in human history to break away from our parents, but yeah, we became best friends with them, despite like that, War of 1812 hiccup, years and years later. And I think of it too, like the Statue of Liberty is, a French gift, So I mean, this the one of the chiefly, the key symbols, of our country, and as a beacon of light to the world, was a gift from the French that we didn't even initially want, and so I just try to celebrate, not just the wars that we've won, but the ones, that we didn't even have to, and the times that for, Teddy Roosevelt, talked about in his big stick, to you know, walk softly and carry a big stick. The times that we use that stick to protect and not just strike. So, I love history. I love my family. I love video games. I love Japan, and I love my country. So, happy Independence Day. Take care.